how can I be of service to others? And this program, it gives you so many ways of getting outside of yourself. Come into the meeting, look at that first step, get a sponsor, read the big book, and do the steps. And your life will be entirely changed.
Welcome to the Daily Reflection Podcast. My name is Michael, and that was the voice of Quentin. Quentin joins us today to share on his experience, strength, and hope around the daily reflection for today. First, the foundation. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here.
It's great to have you. And today we are focusing on the reflection for January 2nd. Quentin, would you read the reflection for us?
Yeah, I'd love to. So it's January 2nd. First, the foundation. Is sobriety all that we can expect of a spiritual awakening? No. Sobriety is only a bare beginning. As Bill sees it, page 8. Practicing the AA program is like building a house. First, we had to pour a big, thick concrete slab on which to erect the house. That, to me, was the equivalent of stopping drinking. But it's pretty uncomfortable living on a concrete slab, unprotected and exposed to the heat, cold, wind, and rain. So I built a room on the slab by starting to practice the program. The first room was rickety because it wasn't used to the work. But as time passed, as I practiced the program, I learned to build better rooms. The more I practiced, the more I built. The more comfortable and happy was the home I now have to live in. Great reading.
First, Quentin, maybe tell us a little bit about your sobriety. What brought you into the rooms?
Sure. So my sobriety date is June 6, 2008. So just celebrated 150 months in program, which I love to share with the group. Came into it after a life of just not being aware of what was going on. And it came a day where what I presume was my life partner said, you got to figure this thing out. And she was back in the days when people found housing on Craigslist, and she moved into a different house, and I was left alone at home with our then 11-year-old kid. And I was scared to death, Mike. And I walked down the street. I knew where I was going. I had passed it many, many times and saw the folks there, saw the little blue sign sitting out front. It's at 96 and Broadway. It's one of the most classic 12-step rooms in New York City. You literally go down steps underground, and rows of chairs, the table at the end, and all the little signs on the wall. And the color of the room is 1960s and 70s nicotine. And it's one of those rooms. Well, I walked down there and I just walked into that room, and I instantly felt like I had arrived. It was just amazing. This reading, Mike, and I think one of the reasons that it really sprung out to me was that, we're just entering January, which means we're just leaving December. And as we often do in program, we sort of practice the steps of the month. And so I just spent all of December with this idea, as it says here in the first line, is sobriety all we can expect of a spiritual awakening, step 12. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that spiritual awakening and what are they and have I had them? It's a really big idea, isn't it? I think
Sure
Bill
is.
sorts of dares us, right?
Mm.
You get to the spiritual awakening, and then he says, no, sobriety is only the bare beginning. So it's a dare, and
Mm.
I took the bait when I saw this. Walking, when I think back onto my spiritual awakenings, I hadn't even read step 1 ever in my whole life. It was up on the wall there. And the group read through those. And so that was my first one. And when we got to step 12 and it said the spiritual awakening, I was like, are you kidding? But when I think back on it, Mike, it was happening right then. I'm expecting you've got a question in here says, what would you say to a newcomer, right? And I'd say, just going into that room, the courage it takes. And I'll admit it, my courage was completely fear-based at that time. I had lost everything I thought my life was in just a minute. But by stepping into that room, I began to look at something that I knew was there all along. And that was my first spiritual awakening.
Yes, I think I've been in that actual room in 96th Street, and it was one of the earlier meetings. I used to work in New York City and spent some time in that room. Would 1 week a month I would go to New York City and stay in the city, and I had just such a blast finding meetings all around the city, and that was one of the ones that I found very early on.
Yeah, I can think of only two that are, in my experience, they're more 12-steppy. Perry Street,
Perry Street
no
for
doubt
sure.
have been there, and then
Hmm.
the Mustard Seed
Yeah.
on Lexington, where I'm 6'4". You almost have to crawl to get in there, which is a wonderful metaphor.
I want to learn a little bit more about what you consider to be that firm bedrock that you're building your program on.
Sure, sure, and I love the metaphor of it being that slab, and then beginning to slowly build the house. And that's what I really feel like I've been doing over the past 12 and a half years. Um, yeah. And as Bill says here, no, sobriety is only the bare beginning, it's the foundation. The arc of my recovery, and I didn't come up with this, I've heard others say it, is that, when you first come in, it gets better. You realize just what you've been going through, and you decide that you're going to admit and then make a change. It goes from better, and then it gets worse. And the worst part for me was, wow, it was just that bad. I didn't realize it when I was active. The whole point was to just not have that thought. And in sobriety, I began to look at it. And I think, as Bill's saying here, you don't want to live on that slab. So stop drinking. But there I am out there in the heat and the wind and the cold on that bare slab. So it gets better, it gets worse.
You said something there that I think is important to call out. The newcomer may be getting a couple of days, and you said it gets worse. And that's something that we rarely tell newcomers because we want to keep the frame of mind positive. But it happens so often that when we give up our coping mechanism, like you mentioned, we give up the tool that we've used for so long to cope with these really difficult feelings, especially for newcomers, not having a solid bedrock of principles in our life and having practiced the full program, we're left with we're left having to deal with these emotions and these feelings and the wreckage of our past.
hmm
Um, what do you tell newcomers around that?
One of the things that's been really on my mind, specifically around the newcomers, is that there was what I used to tell newcomers, but we've been 9 months in Zoom now, right? And
Mm,
it's different. The ability to access the newcomers the way we used to in person, very different. And I can't imagine what coming into sobriety is like for someone who didn't experience the rooms. It was, the first word of the first step, the we. That we was not just conversational and being amongst a group, but it was touching. And that was a big part of it for me. I heard the other day in a meeting you and I go to, that someone came into the rooms originally shaking hands, and then they, after months, they left hugging, right? I remember seeing men hug for the first time in my life, and when I first came in, and saying, I will never do that, right? And that's the disease, though. It's the separation. So the
yeah,
thing I would say to a newcomer is, well, congratulations for just showing up. God,
right on,
that's
right on.
huge part of it.
Yep.
Um, but what I'd also say is take a look at that step one. Don't get carried away with two, three, four, five, and the rest of them. Just step one, and look at that first word, we, and say to yourself, you're going to stop trying to do this alone. We're here. AA is 86 years old now, if I'm doing my
Mm-hmm.
math right. Yeah. It's been we for 86 years. That's what Bill and Bob came up with.
Yeah.
Don't try to improve on this. Just do it, lean into it. Then the next thing I'd say is now make the we real. Go get
Hmm.
yourself a sponsor. Now there's two of you, right?
Hmm.
Can't
Hmm.
can't beat that. And the thing the sponsor's going to ask you to do, and you're going to bristle, but you're just going to do it. You're going to read that big book, all
Mm.
right, and just do it.
And you mentioned Zoom and meetings online. If for some reason you're listening to this sometime in the future, it was recorded in January of 2021, and we're coming out of what I hope to be the final months of this horrible pandemic. And I'm very fortunate to have a home group that has successfully transitioned from in-person meetings, which, quite frankly, were very dangerous for many, many months. And we've got a solid group. Sunrise Semester Group, still out of Philadelphia, meets every single day, 7:15. If you want to join us, the meeting guide is a phenomenal resource, and you can find that meeting as well as many other meetings. And I just wanted to make that clarification. If for some reason this podcast episode manages to stay available for some time, and you're wondering what we're talking about,
Hey, Mike, and it just occurred to me. I joined Sunrise Semester completely virtually. I started in March of last year, so I've never known you guys in person.
that's great. We do have visitors from around the globe, quite a few from Canada. We've got
China,
China,
right?
two people from China on a regular basis, Australia, um, all parts around the world. And that's a beautiful thing. And the great thing about it, Quentin, it reminds me that AA, number one, it works. It works so well, and it works across cultural boundaries, across language boundaries.
So, you got me thinking because you just said before, what are the principles that are the foundation or the bedrock? And you're right, that's the word. Again, back to step 12, we practice these principles in all our affairs. And to my knowledge, Mike, those principles are not listed anywhere. You can't go to the big book and all of a sudden see the list of principles. And in thinking about that, I think that's on purpose. I think that it's basically saying to us, you got to come up with your own principles. There's no universal set of these things. What are yours? And as we continue with the metaphor in the daily reading of building rooms on that slab, on that foundation, and the foundation being sobriety, I think the rooms are the principles. As you mentioned, I'm in New York City. Um, I'm used to living in small houses, very small houses, and so that extending that metaphor, I should have just a few rooms in my house. That's the way I like to live, and I'd say the same thing for the principles. If we just surround ourselves by principles and really big, hard principles, we're never going to get anywhere. Um, we need a set of principles, just the right number. It's not a lot, and they've got to be the real ones for us. And each room becomes those principles for us. So, I would say I've got four rooms in my house, and my principles. My living room is anonymity. That is, tradition 12. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles above personalities. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all things, not recovery, sobriety, fellowship, serenity. I could come up with 1,000 spiritual foundations, and Bill smart enough to pick anonymity. And that is so crucial to my sobriety. And it's not the anonymity I thought it was, Mike, of my name needs to be protected and other people should names should be protected. Anonymity means that I am, and it's going to sound harsh, but I am nobody. Put down the ego, right? I don't know what anyone does in our rooms. No idea, unless I recognize them from TV or a newspaper or something like that.
Which has happened. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sure, you see celebrities in the room, but for the most part, I can't fill in the blank to say that such and so does. I have no idea. They're completely anonymous, as am I. I am not, my armor coming into that room. I'm just bare, just like everyone else.
I love the concept, and especially for newcomers, it's important for them to understand that there's two types of anonymity. There's personal anonymity. When you come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, you should feel comfortable that regardless of whether someone recognizes you or you recognize someone else, what happens in the rooms stays in the rooms, and you can feel completely comfortable going to any room of Alcoholics Anonymous and being secure that your notoriety, your personality is going to be held sacred. That's personal anonymity. And then there's the anonymity that I think you're talking about, which protects the group foundation of AA, because if I were to break my anonymity out there in the world and tell the world who I am and that I am a member of AA, I'm human. I know that I'm only an arm's length away from a drink. And if I were to drink and continue to destroy my life, I would then further tarnish the name of AA. So those are the kind of two tenets of anonymity as I see them.
Yep. Yep. We're not the spokesperson for this thing, are we? Yeah.
Exactly.
I think that second room, the bedroom, the place I sleep, the principle there is honesty,
Hmm.
and learn that in this program. Unflinching honesty, always, never anything but honesty. Um, Look, I've said it in rooms. I come to these meetings because I crowdsource my recovery, and I've got to hear other people's saying their truth. It's often my truth on their lips, by the way.
Mm.
Unbelievable how powerful that is, and we can only get there by just pure honesty and not having to carry those burdens anymore. The first nine steps are all about getting rid of that dishonesty, you know,
Hmm.
and resetting and saying, okay, I don't have to carry that weight on my shoulders anymore. So why would I put it back on? So the dishonesty is out. What I think fits with honesty a little bit, at least for me, also was that idea of fantasy too. I put down fantasy, which was one of my spiritual awakenings this year. I all of a sudden realized one day I don't fantasize anymore. About winning the lottery or sex or do I have an imagination and creativity? Sure, but not fantasy. It's all within the bounds of what I really think I can accomplish. Yeah. And my guest room, gotta have one of those. It's a we program, and Mike, I gotta tell you, I learned this a little bit from you in the time I've been here, and that's kindness. It's a real simple thing, but showing kindness to others. But I would say more importantly for me in sobriety is only choosing to be around people who know kindness. I didn't used to do that. In fact, I was attracted quite to the opposite. I figured that the tougher, harder they were, the better my stature. In some way, it was a funny sort of thinking. And just say, hey, I'm going to stop that and just surround myself with kind people. Um, huge help. And then the last, the room in the house is the kitchen. Gotta have one of those. And there is helpful. That is my principle. How can I be of service to others? And this program, God, it gives you so many ways of getting outside of yourself and to be able to help others. You know, you can see my hand here, and I'm taking it and showing a 180-degree turn with my hand. But everything I thought I knew after being in this program has turned 180 degrees. It's the opposite. Um,
Mm. Well, I love the metaphor of the house and the rooms that you've built, and I greatly respect your program. What else does your service program look like?
my number one tool of service. Well, let me start with how I got into service. The first service position I ever had was in a room at 79th and Broadway. It's called All Angels Church, and one of the service positions. You often hear that at the AA meetings that there's the coffee maker position, things like that. This one had an even easier service position. They called it the chair, and you set up the chairs. And I
Right.
remember getting to that meeting an hour early with a tape measure to set up the chairs, right? Because that's, had to be absolutely perfect. There's my ego, right? And the first person in the room all of a sudden starts moving chairs around. Can make you drink, that sort of thing. Um, but it was where I began to learn to do service. And that is that I can do my part, and then I have to let it go.
Hmm.
My sponsor taught me the true meaning of service I used to live in a big apartment building. It probably had 300 units and it was an old building. And it had a great big lobby and it wasn't in the best shape. And he had me go down there in the middle of the night one time and clean the entire lobby and then go back up. And if I was seen by anybody in the course of doing that, so I was doing it like at 3:30 in the morning, then I had to do it again another night until I wasn't seen. And I was able to do it the first night and get it done. And it actually, I remember being on the elevator and people saying, "Did you notice what happened to the lobby?" And I was sort of sitting there feeling good, and I couldn't say a word. That was the rule. So keeping that anonymity, but it taught me the power of doing something for other people with absolutely zero expectation of reward. And I see the service you do in at Sunrise Semester, and it's not like people are bowing or praying to you. They're thankful, but you're just like, yeah, but this is what we do. It just sets an example, and then it allows others to come in and do it. As I was saying before, that I think that the biggest service that I do is that of a sponsor.
Mm.
And a lot of people might hear this newcomers and think that I'm giving my time to the newcomer or my sponsee. Quite the opposite. I am getting my recovery through that relationship. It's incredibly intimate. Two people sharing on recovery. That's it. And I get just as much out of it as they do.
And that is one of the most powerful things that newcomers neglect to really grasp. Coming into the rooms, you probably have a definite goal of stopping the behaviors that are causing such pain in your life. But when you do make contact with another alcoholic, the service that you as a newcomer are performing is monumental in making yourself available and asking for help, because the person from whom you're asking help gets to reiterate the program. And in doing so, it's almost like progressive immersion. We are re-immersing ourselves in what it's like to be a newcomer. And that really is powerful. So if you are a newcomer and you're hesitating to pick up the phone, stop, because you're going to pick up the phone, you're going to help yourself, but you're also going to help the person on the other end of the line. Yeah.
Perfectly said.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely right.
So I want to ask you if there's anything else that you want to share with the audience on this concept.
Yeah. So I started off by sort of talking about the story arc, and we got off, but it when you come into program, at least for me, it gets better. And then we discussed, it gets worse for a short period, but then what happens is it gets different. And that's, that first rickety room you build, you start to realize, I've got new principles by with which I can live my life. And then after different, it gets real. And that's when, you start to really get your rooms built, your houses looking nice. And then after that, it gets real good. So that idea, the newcomers don't peek too far ahead, but in step 12, it says, having had a spiritual awakening, it's absolutely true. It takes 11 steps to get there. So, God, I would just say, come into the meeting, look at that first step, get a sponsor, read the big book, and do the steps. And your life will be entirely changed. Mine is. I'm living proof of it.
Perfectly stated.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Quentin, thank you. I really appreciate you spending some time with us and helping to carry the message. It's been wonderful chatting with you.
Anytime. I hope I get another day one of these days.
Absolutely.
Take care, man.
You too.
See ya.
Thanks to Quentin for stopping by, and thanks to you for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard today, consider giving us a rating or providing feedback in a comment on one of the podcast networks that you're listening on. That would greatly help us improve the program. Thanks so much, everybody. Tune in every day for the Daily Reflection, experience strength and hope. Have a great day.